Because anytime a nation is punished, everybody is going to bear the consequences, if not the guilt. Their courts are not characterized by justice. The miscarriage of justice has become the order of the day. Truth claims in their courts have no foundation in fact. Intellectual pursuit has degenerated into thinking up mischief and making trouble. Sounds like some of my brethren. Rampant criminality has resulted in the desolation of their highways by highway robbers. The guilty culprits know nothing of peace and justice, and they have pushed and forced their warped character on the nation's highways. There is no peace, and no peace means no travel, and no travel means no commerce, and no commerce means depression and poverty and destitution, and that is the natural result of sin, brother. Verse 9. The people accept Isaiah's analysis of their problems and say, so that is why justice is so far from us. We knew we had problems. Verse 16, when God's people fail to establish justice or defend the helpless, the Lord said, I will intervene myself. I'll personally intervene, and you don't want me to have to intervene. You don't want me to gird on my war garments. And you don't want to see me come walking in a scarlet tunic stained with the blood of my adversaries, because I'll stomp you in the ground. That is a powerful, powerful thought. He will come as a warrior, and he will vindicate the oppressed. And when he begins that campaign in verse 18, it'll have a single purpose, and that is retribution. And you don't want to be standing by when God comes in retribution. The time for words is past, judgment is upon them. That's Isaiah 59. Brethren, sin still separates men from God. And His rebuke is evident in the consequences of man's rebellion. The enormous number of casualties that are mounting daily makes this evident. Moral license has not given us liberty. It has produced bondage of the worst sort. Violence, disease, distrust, divorce, and abortion, and suicide, and murder, and theft, and betrayal, and adultery, and fornication, and drunkenness, and addiction, and hatred, and hunger, and homosexuality, and child abuse, and corruption, and confusion, and slave centers. It doesn't liberate anybody. And intellectual arrogance prevents them from seeing the source of their suffering. And the very culprits of so much of it say, we've got a new plan. We've got a new theory. We just hide and watch. We'll get some more tax money from you and fix everything. And many blame God's restrictive laws. Others shift blame to His servants that call men to repentance. Elaborate theories of personality seek to justify lawlessness. And sociologists and psychologists and counselors and social workers work hard to excuse sin, but sin will wreak havoc in any society advocating it always, in every locality. It still separates men from God, and it will still land its devotees in the lake of hellfire. People endangered by sin must be warned. Individual Christians must be warned. They must be alerted. 1 Timothy 5 and verse 20, them that sin rebuke before all, that others also may fear. You can't allow people to spiritually self-destruct without raising your voice. You wouldn't let a man walk out here on the interstate, even a stranger, David, without saying, look out! You warn him. They must be warned. Families must be cautioned about the dangers confronting them. Paul wrote to some brethren, because he viewed his brethren, his family, in 1 Corinthians 4 and 14, said, I write not these things to shame you, but as my beloved sons, I warn you. Christian parents must be warned that if they raise their children to look like and act like and think like and talk like the world, they're in for real problems. They need to understand that school sponsorship of an activity doesn't make it right. Amen. Parents must be made to realize that allowing the children to set policy in the home and associate with evil companions in the community will produce tragedy, that their daughters will be pregnant without husbands, that their sons will sire bastards, and they'll walk away from those precious, poor little children and never even give them a name and not even be panged in their consciences. And children will be sullen and abrasive and immoral, and they'll leave the church and they'll ridicule the faith. And sadly, families must be warned against some Christian schools They must know that enrolling their children in many of these institutions means placing them under the supervision of liberals and digressives, and it is spiritually throwing them to the lions. Brethren must be warned of the dangers facing the church. Neo-Pentecostals claiming a direct operation of the Spirit. Heretics arguing that you can divorce and remarry for any cause. Liberal professors among us espousing the God-disrespecting, the Bible-destroying documentary hypotheses. Other liberals placing women in the pulpit and pianos in the building. And A&M down here saying they're going to bring in and recognize that this is just a hang-up we've got, and I have the document. Right up the road. Big town church. Indeed. Church must be warned of the dangers posed by society itself. The alarm must be sounded by those who are on the wall, because they have a vantage point that prepares them. Preacher, elder, you better sound the warning, brother. You better not sit up there on the wall and see the armies coming and let them ambush the people of God and be caught by the Lord in that kind of situation. Because if we don't warn them, we're not going to be held guiltless. We'll call such men to account. Ezekiel chapter 33 verses 7 and 8 says, So thou, O son of man, I have set thee a watchman of the house of Israel. Therefore thou shalt hear the word at my mouth, and warn them from me when I say unto the wicked, O wicked man, thou shalt surely die, if thou dost not speak to warn the wicked from his way. That the wicked man shall die in his iniquity, but his blood I will require at thy hand. Not to warn them is to fail of sacred trust. It is to sin against the light. It is to risk everyone and everything. The world is so filled with evil that all who seek to advance the truth must be controversialists. And it is a business of belligerency, not dignified silence. You can't speak the truth without shaming the devil. Amen. No way to do it. Am I therefore become your enemy because I tell you the truth? I pray not, but if so, so be it. God bless us, and may He have mercy on our souls as we seek to sound the alarm.
to the subject of this hour. Is it the case that God at times does overrule evil in order for the promotion of His cause of goodness? Well, I'd like to answer with an emphatic yes, with an ardent affirmative. At times He does certainly overrule evil for the advancement of His cause. I've listed about 8 arguments in the material in the book, and I should like to cover as many of them as I can for our study in the next few moments. But the subject of the providence of God is indeed a thrilling one, a fascinating one. And I'm glad that we now have a book in the Brotherhood that deals from beginning to end with the precious providence of God. I was glad when this subject was announced. I've often tried to speak about the providence of God. I've often written about the providence of God, but I knew of no book that really dealt with it from beginning to end. Many of us have appreciated the 2 great sermons in the McGarvey sermon book, written about a century ago, dealing with the providence of God in Joseph's life and in Esther's life. McGarvey has been dead for 78 years now, and yet these sermons continue to do good. And when all of us here today and all of us who have spoken upon this program have gone the way of all of the earth, providing time continues on for a few more years, I believe this book, The Providence of God, will continue to be a blessing, just as the McGarvey sermons, classics in and of themselves, have been a blessing to thousands of people the last 100 years. In dealing with the providence of God, I recall a definition that was given to providence by the late and lamented Gus Nichols in one of the lectures that he gave at Freed Hardeman a number of years ago. I was just a beginning young preacher at the time, and I remember his dealing with providence upon one occasion, and he said, God's providence is simply God's providing for us. And in a short and concise statement, that's really and truly what the providence of God is all about. But now to the 8 arguments that have been presented in the book. And naturally, I'm going to begin with the one that seems to me to be just as crystal clear and positively plain as anyone could be. God's overruling evil in order that good might ultimately prevail. And that case deals with Joseph. Quite obviously, much in this lectureship deals with Joseph because he's one of the outstanding examples in the Bible of the providence of God at work. Joseph occupies a prime place of importance from Genesis 37 through the end of that book. He's one of the 12 sons of Jacob, sons that were born to the 4 wives, 2 of them primary and 2 of them secondary. All 11 of the sons born in Padan Aram, or 11 of them were, and then the youngest, Benjamin, born in the land of Canaan. Joseph easily became the favorite of his father, perhaps due to a number of reasons, but I've always thought it real strange because Jacob himself had grown up in a home and had witnessed parental partiality at work and some of the things that it can bring into a family framework, and yet he did the same thing within his own home life. We're just bound as human creatures, I suppose, to commit the same mistakes that have been committed by others who have lived earlier. And Jacob certainly did that. He practiced parental partiality, showing his fond favors upon Joseph. And it really frustrated and irritated the older brothers no end, especially in view of the fact that Joseph was given the coat of many colors. And I don't know how many colors might have been involved in that coat and it's being made, but I have an idea that the brothers, every time they saw it, saw another color, and that color was red. It certainly provoked their envy and their jealousy, and they let it be known. All of us are familiar how that when young Joseph was sent from southern Palestine into the central part of the country to check on the brethren who had taken the flocks up there for water and for grass, that Joseph went there as a seeker of his brethren. But upon his arrival, the brethren decided to deal treacherously with him. No longer would he have his father's shield of protection around him. Now they could do away with that dreamer that had indicated in more than one dream that the future will one day find you, my brethren, falling down before me, doing obeisance. And those older brethren didn't believe that day would ever come. They didn't believe that day would ever come when they would bend the knee in respect to younger Joseph. We all remember how that day ultimately came. They sold him into Egyptian captivity, and all the brothers were involved, with the exception of Reuben. We learn in a later account that he had every intention of freeing Joseph from the pit into which they had placed him and returning him safely to his older father down in southern Palestine. But as events worked out in the land of the Nile, Joseph ultimately became governor. And then came the years of the plenty, and then the years of the severe famine, in which time Jacob and the family began to suffer due to the great scarcity of food in the land of Canaan. Upon hearing that there was food available in Egypt, he sent his older sons into the land of Egypt, and as matters developed, they appeared before Joseph, not recognizing him, but falling and doing what the dreams had earlier indicated that would materialize. It's not on that first trip that Joseph makes himself known. It's on the second trip that he reveals himself. And from some 5 verses in Genesis 45 and Genesis 50, Joseph, as he introduces himself to the brothers the second trip, he said, I am Joseph, your brother. Do not be grieved. Do not be angry with yourselves in that you've sold me into this part of the world, because God has intended it for the preservation of life. Some years later, after Jacob had died, and the brethren began to wonder if Joseph might not make some reprisals, might not punish us yet. They went to him, and he said, you need have no fear. Am I in the place or the stead of God? Even though you intended what you did for me to be evil, nevertheless the Lord intended it for good, in order that much in the way of life might be preserved. I'm not sure that Joseph saw all of this those first few years in the land of Egypt. In fact, I'm pretty well confident that he didn't. The very fact that he named his 2 sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, and the names that they suggest would lead me to believe that he did not see as yet God's hand of providence in the matter. But he ultimately did. And even though the brothers had intended this to be an act of evil, God overruled it in such fashion that many, many lives were preserved. I believe that my case could rest right here and stand proof that there are times in which God does overrule evil in order that his cause of ultimate goodness might prevail. But there are other cases, and to them I would like to add in our lesson today. I have long believed that the case of Job is another point along this line. As Job is mentioned to us in the opening verses of his book, he is one of the wealthiest men in the East. He's wealthy in terms of money, in terms of livestock. He has a fine family, 12 in number, including himself, his wife, and the sons and the daughters. He has an extensive household of servants. He's well respected. He enjoys the high approval of God, who said that he was a good man, an honorable man, one that feared God, one that hated or eschewed evil, and a remarkable man. And yet Satan slanders the character of Job and leaves the impression that the only reason that Job is loyal to God is because God has set a hedge about him. He's blessed him abundantly. And if all of his possessions were suddenly to be removed, Satan assured the Almighty that Job, your man on earth, will turn against you and that he will curse you to the face. Well, God allows Satan to take away the possessions of Job. In a matter of moments, he's a bankrupt person economically. His family is tragically taken. Even his wife's loyalty stands in jeopardy toward him. And especially after he began to be afflicted physically, in chapter 2, she turns against him and says, Job, why hold out? Why retain your integrity? Why not just go ahead and curse God and experience death? Why not go ahead and get out of the picture? And Job reprimanded her, and rightly so, suggesting that she talked as one of the foolish women. And Job retained his integrity. From Job the 3rd chapter through Job the 32nd chapter, he has to listen to one harangue after another from his so-called three friends who reason so illogically. They thought that all suffering is a result of personal sin, and that when a man suffers like Job is suffering, he must be about the greatest sinner in all of the world. The world needed a book in the New Testament, and God knew this, to show that a man will serve God whether he has much or whether he has nothing, whether he be in health or whether he be in the deepest of physical affliction. And I think Job goes a long way in helping us to deal with the problem of human suffering. But God overruled it for good, for his ultimate cause, and causes great prosperity to come to Job in the latter part of this wonderful book in the Old Testament. Job is another case in point. But I believe that the entire history of the Israelite nation is another case in point. From the time that Abraham is given the promise in Genesis 12:1-3, throughout the remainder of the Old Testament on into the New Testament, God had a definite design for the Israelite nation to execute. Through that nation, the Messiah was going to come. There are times in the Old Testament when the messianic thread almost seems to be at a breaking point. Yet God overwatches and overrules in such fashion that the land and the people will continue until the coming of him to whom the gathering of the people shall be, as Jacob envisioned in Genesis the 49th chapter, the coming of the great Shiloh, the coming of the mighty Messiah himself. There were times in which God allowed the Israelite nation to suffer, to be chastised. They needed that in the way of discipline. They were taken into captivity in the land of Egypt, but God overruled in such fashion that they were able to leave Egypt, maybe 2 to 3 million strong, went into the wilderness, and again they were chastised and disciplined from time to time. They ultimately came into the land of Canaan, and under General Joshua, they conquered the land of Canaan.